Hey guys, welcome to Karenology. You won't believe how far some people will go to cause trouble. I stepped outside my house and froze. My car, a black unmarked sedan, was already being hooked up to a tow truck. The driver was securing the chains, whistling like this was just another routine job. Standing a few feet away with arms crossed and a smug expression was Karen, my ever-meddling neighbor. "What the hell are you doing?" I snapped, moving toward my car. The driver barely spared me a glance. Karen, on the other hand, smirked and tilted her chin up, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Oh, Jack, relax," she said in that overly sweet yet condescending tone she always used. "Your car has been sitting here for days. It's an eyesore, and frankly it looks abandoned. The neighborhood has standards, you know." I clenched my jaw. "This is my car, parked in my driveway, on my property." Karen shrugged. "Well, it violates local parking ordinances. No non-operational or commercial vehicles parked in residential areas for extended periods. I made a call. Simple as that." I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to lose it right there. "First of all, my car isn't non-operational. Second, it's not a commercial vehicle. Third, even if it was, you don't have the authority to make this decision." Karen rolled her eyes. "The HOA guidelines are very clear. Your car is ugly and disruptive. It doesn't belong here." She turned to the tow truck driver. "Proceed." "Hold on." I yanked my phone out and dialed. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Rodriguez!" "I need you at my house now. Someone's towing my car without cause." "Be there in 5. I turned back just as the driver climbed into his truck. "Don't start that engine. My car is property of the state. You're making a mistake." The driver hesitated, looking between me and Karen. "Lady told me it was abandoned. Got the paperwork." "It's not abandoned," I said through gritted teeth. "It's an active registered police asset, unmarked." Karen laughed. "Oh, please. You expect me to believe that? Where's the badge? Where's the siren?" "Nice try, Jack. If this was a police car, it would have police markings. And honestly, you have the attitude of someone who's just mad he got caught." The driver was getting impatient. "Look, I got a job to do. If there's a problem, take it up with the HOA. Otherwise, I'm taking the car." Sirens wailed in the distance. Karen's smug expression faltered. Moments later, a black and white patrol car screeched to a halt in front of my driveway. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, eyes locked on the tow truck driver. "Let go of that car, now." The driver hesitated, then slowly started loosening the chains. Karen's face twisted in outrage. "Excuse me, officer, but this is a private matter. This man has been keeping an abandoned vehicle here, and as a board member of the HOA, I have full authority to address violations." Rodriguez didn't even look at her. "Jack, what the hell is going on?" I pointed at Karen. "She called in an illegal tow. Says my car is an eyesore. Didn't even bother checking registration." Rodriguez turned to the driver. "You got paperwork?" The man pulled out a clipboard. Rodriguez took one glance and frowned. "This is invalid. No official citation. No government authorization. Just an HOA complaint with no legal grounds. You touch that car again, and I'll book you for vehicle theft." The driver swallowed hard and started unhooking the chains faster. Karen, however, wasn't backing down. "This is ridiculous. You're really letting him get away with this? This is favoritism." Rodriguez finally turned to her. "Ma'am, you just attempted to have a state-owned vehicle towed without proper cause. Do you have any idea how serious that is?" Karen scoffed. "Oh, please, it's not a real police car. He's just trying to scare me." Rodriguez's face hardened. "Then I guess we'll take it to the station and see what the department has to say." Karen's smirk flickered. "You wouldn't." Rodriguez pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, I need a supervisor at my location. Possible illegal towing of a government asset." Karen's face drained of color. "Now wait just a minute." The tow truck driver wasn't waiting. He yanked the rest of the chains off and jumped back into his cab, peeling away from the scene like he wanted no part of this mess. Karen stared after him, mouth agape. Rodriguez turned to me. "You want to press charges?" I met Karen's stunned gaze. "Not yet, but she's not getting away with this." Rodriguez nodded. "Then I'd suggest you get ahead of it. She's going to retaliate." I already knew that, and I was ready for it. Karen wasn't just a petty neighbor with an ego problem. She was dangerous in the way people who think they're untouchable are. And if she was willing to pull this stunt, she wasn't going to stop here. I glanced at my car, then at Karen, who was already storming back to her house, no doubt planning her next move. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee, expecting peace. Instead, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. I ripped it off, scanning the fine print. Failure to comply with HOA guidelines regarding vehicle placement. Immediate action required or fines will be issued. I glanced toward Karen's house. Her curtains twitched. Of course, she wasn't backing down. This was retaliation, just as Rodriguez had warned. I sighed, folding the paper in half and stuffing it in my pocket. If she thought a fine was going to intimidate me, she had another thing coming. An hour later, I was on the phone with the HOA office, waiting for a supervisor. The hold music was grating. Finally, a voice answered. "This is Susan Cartwright, HOA director. How can I help you?" "Yeah, I just got a violation notice on my door about my car. There's no reason for it. I need this resolved immediately." A pause. "Your vehicle was improperly parked. Several complaints were filed. We followed procedure." "Procedure? You let one person dictate policy? Karen Miller filed that complaint? No one else has a problem." Susan hesitated. "Mr. Halloway, the HOA board enforces rules equally." "Then why wasn't I contacted first? Why didn't anyone confirm if this was even legitimate? You do realize that car belongs to the state?" Silence. Then a sigh. "I can request a board review, but that process takes time. In the meantime, you'll need to comply." "You expect me to move my own car from my own property over a false complaint?" "The alternative is daily fines. It's your choice." I clenched my teeth. "Fine, schedule the review." I hung up. Karen was playing dirty, but if she wanted a war, she'd get one. That afternoon, I saw the next move before it happened. A tow truck circled the block slowly. Karen was standing in her yard, phone in hand, pretending not to watch. I walked straight to my car and leaned against it, arms crossed. The truck idled at the curb. I stared at the driver. He stared back. Then he shrugged and pulled away. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She had expected me to be gone, or maybe too slow to react. I smirked and saluted her. She turned on her heel and marched inside. She was escalating. I needed to be ready. The following evening, I returned from a grocery run to find my driveway blocked. 2 orange traffic cones and a makeshift no parking sign stood right where my car should be. I looked up to see Karen watering her garden, smiling. "Oh dear," she said, voice dripping with faux concern. "Looks like the HOA issued new guidelines. You'll have to find somewhere else to park." I walked up to the cones and kicked them aside. "This isn't legal." "It is now. New safety regulation. Vehicles can't be within 5 feet of property lines. HOA's orders." "Funny, no one mentioned it at the last meeting. Emergency meeting just this morning." "Without notifying the homeowners? That's a violation of your own bylaws." She shrugged. "You can take it up with the board. But for now, you can't park here." I exhaled sharply, stepping closer. "You're going to regret this." She tilted her head. "Oh, Jack, that sounds like a threat. I hope you're not getting aggressive." I stepped back, jaw tight. Karen thrived on control, and she thought she had the upper hand. But I wasn't done yet. That night, I made a few calls. By morning, the city inspector was standing in her yard, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, we've received multiple complaints about unauthorized HOA modifications. These signs and cones violate public property regulations. You'll need to remove them immediately." Karen's face went pale. "There must be a mistake. The HOA approved." "Doesn't matter. You don't have jurisdiction over public easements. Remove them, or face a citation." I watched from my porch, arms crossed, enjoying the show as she begrudgingly removed the cones. She shot me a glare. "You think you're clever," I smiled. "No, I just know the law." But I knew she wasn't giving up, and neither was I. Over the next week, things escalated further. Karen started sending letters to the HOA about my aggressive behavior, claiming I was a danger to the neighborhood. Suddenly, I was getting notices about noise complaints, despite never playing music or making a ruckus. My trash was knocked over mysteriously, and HOA fines started appearing in my mailbox with vague violations. She was using every tool she had to make my life miserable. But I had tools too. I started gathering evidence. Security footage of her on my property, tampering with my trash bins, recordings of her HOA announcements that contradicted official policy. I documented every notice, every fake complaint, every attempt to harass me. Then I sent everything to a lawyer. The next time Karen came strutting across my lawn with a new complaint, I handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked suspiciously. "Cease and desist. Legal notice. You keep harassing me, and we take this to court." For the first time, Karen hesitated. "You wouldn't?" I stepped closer. "Try me." She snatched the envelope, scanning the contents. Her confidence wavered, but she wasn't done yet. "This is ridiculous. You're just making trouble for yourself." I shrugged. "Guess we'll find out." She turned on her heel and stormed off, but I knew she wasn't giving up. And neither was I. The real battle was just getting started. The next few days were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Karen hadn't retaliated yet, and that wasn't like her. I knew she was planning something. I just didn't know what. But I was ready. Or at least, I thought I was. It started with the letter. A formal notice from the HOA delivered straight to my mailbox. I tore it open and read the first few lines. "Due to repeated violations and hostile behavior, an emergency board meeting has been scheduled to discuss the possible expulsion of Mr. Jack Halloway from the neighborhood HOA community. Attendance is mandatory." I exhaled sharply. So that was her play. She couldn't beat me in a fair fight, so she was trying to turn the entire HOA against me. That evening, I arrived at the community center where the meeting was being held. The room was packed. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, whispering among themselves. At the front, Karen stood next to a table stacked with folders. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse right before pouncing. I took a seat near the front. The HOA president, a tired-looking man named Mark, cleared his throat. "All right, let's get started. We're here to discuss ongoing concerns regarding Mr. Halloway and his repeated disregard for community regulations." Karen stood up, holding a stack of papers. "I have documented evidence of Mr. Halloway's aggression, property violations, and blatant disrespect for HOA guidelines. For the safety of our neighborhood, I propose that we take action immediately." She began handing out papers to the board members. I grabbed one and scanned it. Half of it was nonsense. Fabricated complaints, manipulated photos, ridiculous accusations. Karen had gone all out. I stood up. "This is a joke. Everyone in this room knows Karen has been targeting me from the start. These so-called complaints are nothing but lies." Karen gasped. "Are you calling your neighbors liars? Because these complaints didn't just come from me. Multiple residents have expressed concerns." "Oh, really? Then why am I only hearing about them now? Why wasn't I ever given a chance to respond?" "Because you made them up, Karen. Just like you made up that parking violation." Murmurs spread through the room. Mark sighed. "Mr. Halloway, the board has the authority to enforce community guidelines. If you feel these complaints are unfounded, you're welcome to appeal." I smirked. "Oh, I plan to. In fact, I already have legal representation. And considering Karen's long history of harassment, I'm sure a judge would love to see how this HOA is being weaponized against homeowners. Karen's face turned red. You can't threaten us with lawsuits every time you break the rules. I can when the rules are being used to target me specifically. More murmurs. Some neighbors nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Karen sensed the shift in energy and doubled down. This man is dangerous. I have proof that he's been tampering with HOA records, intimidating residents. Oh, I'd love to see that proof, I interrupted. Because I have security footage of you trespassing on my property. I have emails showing how you've manipulated reports. I have a cease and desist letter that you ignored. Should I keep going? The room went silent. Karen's jaw clenched. Mark rubbed his temples. All right, we're going to table this discussion for now. No decisions will be made tonight. Karen spun toward him. You can't be serious. We have to act before it's too late. Enough, Karen, Mark snapped. We'll review the claims fairly. Until then, Mr. Halloway has the same rights as any homeowner. This meeting is adjourned. I exhaled as people stood and filtered out. Karen stayed planted in place, staring at me like I had just burned her house down. I smiled. Looks like you lost this round. She leaned in close, voice low. You think this is over? I'm just getting started. I didn't doubt it. And that's what worried me most. The next day, I knew Karen wasn't done. She had lost her attempt to use the HOA against me, and that only meant she would escalate further. What I didn't expect was how fast she would strike back. At exactly 6 a.m., a pounding on my door jolted me awake. I grabbed a shirt, groggy but alert, and opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing on my porch. Karen was behind them, arms crossed, looking triumphant. One of the officers, a tall man with a buzz cut, nodded at me. Mr. Halloway, we received a report that you've been engaging in harassing behavior toward your neighbors. I sighed. Let me guess. From her? I jabbed a thumb at Karen, who gasped dramatically. How dare you? I've felt unsafe in my own home for weeks now. I have video evidence of him threatening me. The second officer, a woman with sharp eyes, pulled out a notepad. Mr. Halloway, we need to ask you a few questions. Do you have any history of disputes with Ms. Miller? I smirked. A history? Absolutely. She's been trying to get rid of me since I moved in. Illegally tried to tow my car, filed fake HOA complaints, tried to have me expelled from the community. And now this, Karen scoffed. Oh, so now I'm just making everything up? You yelled at me in front of the entire HOA. You've been aggressive toward me and I don't feel safe. I crossed my arms. And what exactly does your so-called video evidence show? Karen fumbled with her phone, scrolling with exaggerated frustration. I sent it to the HOA already. The female officer held out her hand. Why don't you show it to us now? Karen hesitated just a second too long. Then she turned the phone toward them, playing a video where I was standing in my driveway, pointing at her. My voice was raised, sure, but nothing remotely resembling a threat. The video cut off right before Karen had smirked and walked away. The officers exchanged glances. The male officer sighed. Ms. Miller, do you have anything else? Karen sputtered. That's not enough? You saw how aggressive he was? He's dangerous. The female officer turned to me. Mr. Halloway, do you have security cameras? I nodded. Of course, and unlike Karen, I don't edit my footage. I led them inside and pulled up my laptop. Within seconds, I found the full footage from the incident. This time, they saw the whole thing, how Karen had deliberately provoked me, how she had taunted me, and how I had walked away the second I realized she was baiting me. The male officer leaned back. Well, that's certainly different from what we were led to believe. Karen's face turned red. That doesn't prove anything. He could have edited that. The female officer shook her head. Ms. Miller, if you continue filing false reports, you could face legal consequences. I suggest you stop wasting our time. Karen's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. She spun on her heel and stormed out. The officers gave me a nod and left. I exhaled. That was too close. She was getting desperate. Over the next few days, things escalated further. My mailbox was mysteriously knocked over. My trash cans were overturned every morning. Small things, but I knew exactly who was behind them. Then, late one night, I caught her. I had installed additional motion-activated cameras after her last stunt, and at 2:14 a.m., the system sent an alert to my phone. I opened the live feed, and there she was, Karen, sneaking into my yard with a can of spray paint. I bolted out the door before she could start vandalizing. "Really, Karen?" I called out. She jumped, dropping the can, then spun toward me. "This is harassment!" I laughed. "Harassment? You're trespassing on my property in the middle of the night. That's a felony." Karen's eyes darted around, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. She had been caught red-handed. I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Go ahead, explain it to the cops." Her face went pale. "You wouldn't." I dialed 911. "Try me." By the time the police arrived, Karen was in full meltdown mode, screaming about how I was the real criminal and how the neighborhood was under siege by my toxic masculinity. It was a sight to behold. The officers took one look at the footage and had enough. "Ms. Miller, you're under arrest for trespassing and attempted vandalism." As they cuffed her, she shrieked, "This isn't over! I'll ruin you!" I just smiled. Good luck with that. But even as they drove her away, I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat, and I had a feeling her final move was still coming. The morning after Karen's arrest, I expected a sense of peace. But instead, a different kind of tension filled the air. The neighborhood was buzzing with whispers, and I could feel the eyes of my neighbors watching me as I walked to my car. Karen had spent years manipulating and intimidating these people, and now that she was gone, at least temporarily, they didn't know what to do. I climbed into my car, but before I could start the engine, a knock on my window startled me. I turned to see Mark, the HOA president, standing there with a weary expression. I rolled down the window. "Something I can do for you, Mark?" He sighed. "We need to talk." I stepped out of the car and leaned against the hood. "Go ahead." Mark rubbed his temples. "Look, I know things have gotten messy, but Karen's husband has hired a lawyer. They're claiming she was unlawfully arrested, that she was framed." I let out a short laugh. "Framed? Mark, she was caught on my security cameras. That's not exactly open to interpretation." He nodded. "I know, but the lawyer is arguing that the footage was doctored, that you've had a personal vendetta against her and manipulated the evidence." I exhaled. "And you? Do you believe that?" Mark hesitated. "I believe Karen is a menace, but she's also been on the HOA board for years, and she has friends in high places. If her husband throws enough money at this, she could weasel her way out." I studied him. "So why are you telling me this?" "Because she's not done. If she gets out, she'll come back harder. She'll drag this neighborhood through the mud just to get back at you. And honestly, I don't want to be in the middle of that." I crossed my arms. "Then help me make sure she stays out." Mark hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I might be able to pull some strings, but you need more than just the footage. You need to hit her with something even she can't squirm out of." I already had an idea. That afternoon, I drove to City Hall. I had been gathering evidence for weeks, but now it was time to put it all together. Every fake fine, every forged document, every attempt she had made to manipulate the HOA for her own benefit. It was all in my possession. And the city's legal department was very interested. By the time I left the office, the wheels were in motion. If Karen thought she could buy her way out of this, she was in for a surprise. Because this time, the fight wasn't just between us. 2 days later, Karen was released on bail. I knew the moment she was back because a black sedan pulled up in her driveway, and she stepped out with an arrogant smirk. The moment she saw me, she gave a little wave, as if nothing had happened. I walked over. "Enjoy your stay in county jail?" She flipped her hair. "Oh, please. Do you really think I'd be gone for long? My lawyer is handling everything. You should be worried, Jack. I'm going to bury you. I smirked. Funny, I was just about to say the same thing. Before she could respond, another car pulled up. A city official stepped out, holding a folder. Ms. Miller, we need to have a word about some irregularities in your HOA financial reports. Karen's smirk faltered. Excuse me? We've received multiple complaints about fraudulent activity, and after reviewing the evidence, we're launching a formal investigation. You'll need to come with us. Karen's confidence wavered for a split second before she scoffed. This is absurd. Your lawyer can meet us downtown. This is a city matter now. Karen turned to me, rage flashing in her eyes. You think you've won? I smiled. I think I just played by your rules. As the official led her away, the neighbors gathered around, murmuring amongst themselves. I turned to see Mark watching, arms crossed. He gave me a small nod. Karen had spent years making herself the queen of this neighborhood. But in the end, all it took was the truth to bring her down, and this time she wasn't coming back.